I can't keep on losing my time. I can't keep on losing my mind. Got me feeling so low, so low, so low, so low, so low, breaking me down. Got me feeling so low, so low, so low, yeah, so low, breaking me down, breaking me down.
Content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification button. And please, feel free to share the video. Thank you. What's good? Can y'all hear me? What's good? Everybody! What's cracking with y'all, man? What's happening? What's cracking? So, you know, I've been away for a little bit. Just chilling. Trying to stay away from the fray. Trying to get my mind right and handle some personal business. But what's up? Mr. Pump and Dump, what's cracking? Chris G, what's happening? High Scholar, what's happening? Sir Abaduya, what's going on, man? Very Little, Charles Faulkner, woo! Smooth Groove, what's happening? I see you keep it 100. Rashid Barnes, what's cracking? Gemini Get Knowledge, what's happening? So it's been a while, man. You know, I know I've been a while gone, you know. Just taking some time, man, to chill out, man, to assess, you know, what's going on in my own life and what's going on in this space and the work that I do here, and, you know, just trying to stay above the monkey business, because, you know, I don't like to get engaged in monkey business, you know. I like to keep it real, man. And speaking of realness, man, I want to give a real sincere shout out to all the members of the Green Gorilla channel. So let me take care of that. I want to give a shout out to Craig, Antonio Feria, Omni Americana, Cameron 87, Deshaun Nolly, Brian Peaks, Mr. Lou Meth, Michael Ross, Nelso, Apex Prowler, Kareen Henry, Doc LaRock, Julius Ferguson, B. Hillfire, Jay Charles, Mark Holt, Lee Ways, Jeffrey Speed, The Nameless Protagonist, The Face, Rais Muajib, Mark Swift, Show Me, Black Dog, Odd Collar, Raphael Brown, Deanne, Donald Watts, Barry Little, Ryan Jackson, HipHop.ca.tv, Coach DC, The Remedy, Kashif Caldwell, Ominous Black, I Am Black Man, Nichita, True King 337, Mr. Blue Collar, Barnolas, Kyle J. Sura, I'm Just Jules, The Book of Ronin, Ab Media 83, Brian McMurray, TD Hip Hop Media, Drew Main, Artisan MC, Mr. Heat, Afro Analyst, Issa Abdul Zahir, Sir Anthony, MLR, Charles Rogers, Universal 178, Blacksword 404, Rashid Barnes, Aaron Smith, DH, See Truth the Revelator, Gold Professor, Black Pill Ned Stark, Arthur Unknown, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Brian Williams, Kalanja Kala, Ricky Dawson, Cedric Bowman, True 7360, BK Born Shahid, James Washington, Hostile Adept, Seven Coast Dojo, W Pure One, Rogish the Billmonger, I Care, BGS Ivmore, Marvin Battle Jr., Soul Pen, Anu 219, Pursuer Prisoner, Taz, Kwaku 217, S. Haywood, Dragon 59, Supreme Ibmore, Adrian Hicks, Jay Bailey, Mr. Michi, Momal, William Ruffin, and Asangwa. Shout out to all y'all, man, for sticking by your boy, man, and supporting me for the short tenure that I've been doing this little stream thing, man. Appreciate y'all, man. Appreciate y'all, man. For real, y'all deserve some honors, man. And that's honest. So let me give y'all a round of applause, man. Let me give y'all an applause round for that, man. Appreciate y'all. Appreciate y'all, man. So, you know, I took a little bit of time off, man, for myself, man. You know, just a little time, man, before I was, you know, just a little short interim period, man, so I can, you know, take care of some personal business, man, and handle, you know, some things going on here in Huntsville, Texas. But, you know, shout out to all my peoples out there, man. Shout out to 77 Base X, man. Welcome to the Green Gorilla channel, man. You deserve some fanfare for that, bruh. Appreciate you, man. Appreciate that, my brother. Let me give you a little bit of fanfare, my brother. Thank you for that. Thank you, man. I appreciate you becoming a member, man. You know, memberships are not easy to come by, and it's your hard-earned cash. One of the things I like to tell people, man, you know, you don't have to invest in the Green Gorilla channel, but when you do, it is greatly appreciated. So thank you. Appreciate that. And, you know, look, I took a break because, you know, sometimes, man, I feel like the manosphere is a little bit toxic. And, you know, I don't like to engage in toxicity, man. I'm almost 50 years old. And so, you know, my younger years and my younger days, I would entertain monkey business and foolishness, man, but I'm too old for that, man. You know, It's time for us to, as adults and mature men, to behave maturely, not to curse each other out, not to call each other names, not to, threaten each other with physical harm. I mean, it's one thing to protect yourself and to assert that you will protect yourself. It's another thing, to threaten people or to get, out of, your normal element and your ability to control yourself. It's another thing altogether to engage in that. And that's what this space is not supposed to be about. Not supposed to be about men threatening one another with physical or bodily harm. It's not supposed to be slanderous or libelous. It's supposed to be informative and helpful. And any time that I feel like it's not that, I'm going to withdraw from it. I feel like I'm here to have a conversation, not here to have a confrontation. Conversation, not confrontation. And, when I feel like it's devolving, I'm going to remove myself. And that's just the way that it is. And I'm sorry for all my members because, you invest in the channel and I'm supposed to be here all the time giving you information to the best of my ability. And, I'm free and open such that if anybody wants to challenge what I have to say, I'm amenable to that. But all I'm asking for is that you be humble and be respectful as we disagree. That's it. Because it's enough stress that black men got to go through in this culture and in this society as it is. And we don't need to put extra stress on each other in pursuit of what? Being the big man in the space? In pursuit of what? Honor, status. Come on, man. We got to do better than that. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not going to allow myself to devolve into that. And, what's funny to me is, and what's ironic, is that a lot of men in this space, have derogatory things to say about Pookie and Ray Ray, or about subculture, or about street culture. But it's ironic, though, when you see men in the space exhibit that very self-same kind of behavior. It's ironic, man. It's oxymoronic. I just don't get it. But I'm not going to try to get it. I'm just going to stay above it. You take the low road, I'm going to take the high road at the end of the day. Because it's all about ideas. And it's all about finding means and methods by which to ameliorate the condition of black men and to give ourselves a voice and to let the world know that we're not what they say we are. But it's a shame, though, that sometimes we exhibit behavior and we commit actions that confirm everybody's negative suspicions about us. They say we're violent. They say we have animosity. They say our masculinity is toxic. And then we go proving them right by exhibiting the toxicity on each other and imploding. I just don't have time for that, man. I don't. So, I want to talk about that, though, because, I've never taken the academic route to talk about the subculture of violence and its connection to black men. But the subculture of violence theory was initially proposed by criminologists and sociologists in the early and the mid 20th century as a means by which to demonstrate the cultural inferiority of black people. Now, those are the facts. You might not like it, but it's odd to hear black men parakeet that. And there are a lot of causes for behavior. But we only want to look at one aspect of it. Choices, decisions, personal responsibility. But there are a variety of factors that contribute towards a person behaving the way that they behave. And that's all I want to do is to discuss and to demonstrate this theory and why black men ought to be cautious against echoing and parakeeting and mimicking that theory. That's all. And you can make your own evaluation and you can make your own decision after that. But I feel like it's important to go over it. So I have an article. It's long as hell, but I'm not going to read the entirety of it. I'm just going to read the first few, sections of it. And then after that, you can make your own assessment and decision. That's on you. Okay. Now, if you want to see that, if you want to see it while I'm reading it, put a 1 in the comments section. If you don't care to see it and you just want me to kind of go over it, I'll do that. Put a 2. So if you want to see it, put a 1. If you just want me to walk you through it, no visuals, I'll just do that. Put a 2. So I'm going to wait and see what you want, because I'm going to give it to you how you want it. So let me know which way you prefer it. And peace out to y'all, man. I see you, Sir Abaduya. Let me know which way you want it. Okay, you want number 1, I'm going to give you number 1. I see one individual already put a 1. And thank you, sir. Fast Attack Tough, 688. Appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to show it then. All right, so let me get this queued up. We go to my display. Yeah, all y'all want to see it, so I'm going to make sure that you get that. All right, so let me just queue it up. I assume that you can see this. All right. No, you can't see it. So let me just make. All right. I assume that you can see my screen right now. So anyway, what I'm about to read to you is an article written by an academician. And they work for the Ontario Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. I read this excerpt at least about 3 or 4 times, all the way from beginning to end. And I think it's a good literature review, because it's basically going over the essence of the arguments, counter arguments, problems with the counter arguments, and in sum, it gives you room for where you should go next. Like, what is the next stage of development related to this area of thinking? Okay, so I'm just going to start at the beginning. I wish I could move it all the way to, let me see if I can big it up a little bit and move it over. Okay, yeah. So anyway, the subculture of violence. We talk about this. You can call it street culture, thug culture, Pookie and Ray Ray culture. You can call it whatever you want to, okay? But its genesis is in the subculture of violence theory, okay? Now, the article starts off, it says, and I'm only going to read the first couple of sections, and then after that, you can ask me questions, and at a later point, we can have a discussion about it. I don't have StreamYard up, so I'm not ready or prepared to have a panel about it, but you can ask me questions through the chat. So anyway, the article basically says, the search for the causes of violence has been an ongoing preoccupation of criminologists since the early 20th century. When researchers attempted to look beyond biological, which is Black people are inferior, so that's why they're violent, and psychological explanations to understand crime. Black people are crazy, inherently psychologically deficient, right? So when they began to look beyond these kind of understandings about how crime is generated, they moved to a different place, okay? And that place, of course, is going to be, as you all know, culture, okay? So the shift in understanding violence as a social phenomenon, so something that arises out of a social context as opposed to something that's seated in the biology, the individual biology, or the individual psychological disposition of the person, right? It emerged from observations that incidents of violence tend to not be evenly distributed within society. So in other words, what that's saying is you see more violence in different pockets and places and locations in society than you see in others. And so therefore, we want to try to trace the origins or the causes of this pronounced amount of violence in these other demographics or these other areas of pockets. All right. So it says, rather, rates of crime and violence vary spatially and demographically. The endeavor to understand these patterns has generated a range of theories that highlight various social processes, including how crime is learned, how it's taught, and how it emerges from social inequalities. Among these various explanations, though, few have been as durable as the explanation of culture. So again, you got a whole bunch of different explanations, right? You got how it's learned, how it's taught, how there are structural inequalities to give rise to it. But the most popular and the most, commonly accepted or the most permanent form of explaining the behavior is culture. Okay? So, where did cultural explanations for violence come to be? I mean, when did it come to be and where? Who are the people who devised this theory? Right? So, the article basically says when you start to look at it, it first emerged in the works of American delinquency theorists in the 30s, in the 1930s. And they were trying to figure out why there were more concentrations of crime and violence in poor, urban African American neighborhoods in the 30s. Now, we're talking about the 30s. We're not talking about the 90s. We're not talking about the 2000s. And if you don't know, you should know that generally violent crime in America all across the board is down. That's just a fact. Okay? Violent crime is on the downtick. It's not on the uptick. But if you look at the media, you'll be, constantly bombarded with these negative images of black men, and you'll think that we were where we were in the 90s. We're not. But anyway, so you get this theory emerging with American delinquency theorists in the 30s. So the people whom are listed here are Selin in 38, Miller follows him in 58, and then Cohen also in 51 were among the first of many cultural deviance theorists to develop the concept of a criminal subculture and to link it to social problems like poverty and inequality. But it wasn't until the 60s that Wolfgang and Ferracuti, this is the origin of the subculture of violence theory. Now, a lot of us use it, and this is important for you to understand, man. These ideas are developed in academia, and then they filter into the general population. And then they become accepted as common knowledge, common sense. But common sense ain't common. There's an origin and a genesis of everything. I'm trying to explain the genesis of this way of thinking about crime, about Pookie and Ray Ray, about street culture, and so on and so forth. All right. So it was in the 60s that Wolfgang and Ferracuti launched a distinct and comprehensive subculture of violence thesis, possibly the most well-known theory in this genre of work. So, like, if anybody talks about the subculture of violence, it's going to be Wolfgang and Ferracuti that they refer to. All right. So they attempted to outline a method and a framework for the empirical examination of what they considered to be violent subcultures. And central to their discussion was the idea that higher rates of violence amongst lower class and racialized populations could be explained by the fact that these groups have embraced values and norms that are more permissive of violence. So we permit violence. We like it. We permit it. We have a value system that encourages violence. Okay? And it was racialized. It was black males, man. Young black males were the target of their theory. Now, this is the 60s, 67, like 2 years after the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, and all of that. Fair Housing Act, only a few short years after that. So we're not all that far removed from segregation, is when these criminologists developed this theory. Okay? So the theory assumes the existence of a distinct subcultural pro-violent value system that developed in opposition to the dominant or middle class norms and values. Now, I'm gonna come back and see if y'all still there with me, right? Because I can't see anything y'all can see. So I gotta every now and then check. All right. So this is where this all came from, okay? So this is where it came from, Wolfgang and Ferracuti, all right? So, I mean, then the literature review of the article I'm reading says, yeah, we're going to provide a detailed discussion of the subculture of violence thesis and trace its development from the work of Wolfgang and Ferracuti to its more current applications. Though the subculture of violence thesis was originally devised to explain and examine high rates of violence among structurally marginalized populations and neighborhoods, since then, the framework has been applied and evaluated in relation to a variety of other demographics and locales. So you have the South, the American South, right? Athletes, middle schools and high schools within the US and Iceland. You also have a continued exposition of this work to understand the existence of a Black subculture of violence. But really it was created initially to explain Black people's, young Black males' behavior. That they have I was about to say an effed up culture, but they have a screwed up culture, okay? They have poor values. Now, the funny thing to me about this is, and this is what's odd about it, it's not as if white people have not been historically violent. And it's not also readily, understandable that the white middle class was created by the government during the New Deal. They gave them a middle class because the Great Depression was a time where they were living in squalor. They created projects for these people, and then Black people moved into those projects as hand-me-downs. So they knew something. I mean, to me, it's like, okay, as far as I'm concerned, this is just my intuition and me speaking off the cuff, but my guess is they knew that these weren't permanent conditions for people and that people wouldn't thrive and flourish and function adequately in these kind of, living conditions. But it became a permanent fix for us while it was a temporary fix for them. So they subsidize a middle class by basically giving men and women, but primarily white men, federal housing loans. And they created suburban America for these people. And they left us inside of the inner cities, in the projects. Okay? Now, let me just move on with it, okay? But these folks have been violent before. Like, very violent. All you got to do is just go back and look at the history of the West. Look at the tradition of dueling. What do you think a duel is? Somebody dishonors another man. The other man calls him out. We're going to fight, or we're going to kill each other. Exact same kind of culture. But they developed this whole idea of the middle class and, the kind of values that exist there. But this was after all of this subsidization by the government to create that middle class, which they never did for us. But I digress. So anyway, values, norms, and violence, the subculture of violence thesis. So in this work, Wolfgang and Ferracuti draw upon Wolfgang's earlier work on inner city African American neighborhoods in Philly in order to formulate an operational definition of the concept of a subculture. The key objective of their work is to develop a way to identify and measure subcultures of violence in order to scientifically prove their existence. So they want to scientifically prove that there is the existence of a subculture amongst young Black males. Notice how it's primarily about young Black males. In order to do so, the authors propose an integrated methodological and theoretical approach, which involves drawing from a variety of existing criminological theories, as well as insights from sociology and psychology. With regard to explaining how subcultures cause violence, Wolfgang and Ferracuti argue that violence is a product of conformity to a pro-violent subculture that is in direct conflict with the dominant culture. But this is funny to me, it's odd. When do you start counting violence among Black folks? During Jim Crow? During emancipation? Or directly thereafter during Reconstruction? Like, when do you start to notice this acute form of violence amongst black men or black culture in general? Did you see it during slavery? Did you see it directly after Reconstruction? Do you see it in inner cities? Where do you see it? When did it come to be? And what about all the white violence against black folks and Native Americans all the way up to that point? I just don't understand. So if there's violence everywhere, why do you just want to talk about the violence in the specific area? This is white folks now. They want to talk about our violence. My viewpoint is you need to turn the mirror and look at yourself and look at all the violence that y'all have wrought throughout the world. That's my viewpoint on it. You're talking about violence. We're talking about rape. We're talking about castration. We're talking about lynching. We're talking about bombing, ransacking, cross burning, the whole nine. And I could get into how gangs actually came to be amongst black folks, especially black folks in the inner city, when they moved from the South to the North and to the West and to the Midwest. There's a perfect movie to show you the genealogy of all these gangs. It's called Bastards of the Party. Go look at the documentary. These were black kids, black boys, who moved to the West in this particular video, and they were attacked by white gangs. One of the largest and the most powerful gangs amongst these whites were the spook hunters. So they bonded together in order to fight against white boys who are already ganged up and beating them up wherever they were. But we don't want to talk about that violence. We just want to talk about our own. And look, I don't have a problem like talking about the violence that we enact on each other, because I think it needs to stop. Because we need to find other ways to reconcile our differences other than resorting to violence. But I mean, come on, man. Like, how can you talk about violence amongst black folks and say that there's a subculture of it when the whole society that you formed was predicated upon violence? First of all, you came here and sailed the ocean blue, Spaniards, Columbus, Ferdinand and Isabella, and they founded this country. Not necessarily the country, but the colonization of this country or this landmass, this continent. And all they did was commit acts of violence against the native population. Then you get the French involved. Then you get the Portuguese involved. And then they start committing acts of violence against one another in order to determine who's going to control the landmass. Then here come the Anglos. And they commit acts of violence against the French and the Spanish in order to control this landmass, while subjecting Africans to slavery and the Native American population to genocide. But we want to talk about black violence. I just, like, in the context of history and the worldview, I'm just trying to understand why these white men are pointing the finger at black folks when, for the most part, they kind of fully well know some of the causes or the reasons why there's such dysfunction in our communities. Because they're partially to blame for it. Because they created these structural conditions, and they know what kind of structural conditions give rise to violence, because they eliminated them among some of their own people. But that's just my viewpoint. Maybe you disagree, and it's fine. You can disagree, but at least disagree respectfully. All right? Anyway, going on. While they do not suggest the subcultures are in total conflict with the societies of which they are a part, the authors note that the overt use of force or violence. Like, again, when do you want to start counting overt use of violence? When? Overt use of force or violence, either in interpersonal relationships or in group interaction, is generally viewed as a reflection of basic values that stand apart from the dominant, central, or parent culture. I just don't understand that, man, given the context of the history of violence by these people. where violence is the norm. I just don't get it. We're talking about the Wild West and how it was pioneered. It was done so with the gun. We're talking about how the landmass was actually acquired through force and fraud. So my question is, when do you want to start examining violence? Like, it's quite convenient to just start examining violence now after you've committed these atrocious macro forms of violence in order to acquire what you got. But now you want to zoom in on our impropriety. That's my issue. So anyway, Wolfgang and Ferracuti offer no explanation as to how subcultures of violence evolve in the first place, despite their assertions that they tend to be a lower class, racialized, and masculine phenomena. Now, why is this important? Why am I even going over this in the first place? You think it's because I'm trying to be antagonistic towards men in this space. But what I'm really actually going to eventually do, and I think I might just do it tomorrow, I'm going to show you how intersectional feminists, black feminists, use the subculture of violence theory in order to demonstrate how bereft of value and how corrupt and culturally abnormal black men are. This is the reason, the very reason why they are able to be perceived as above the fray as it pertains to how they're treated versus how we're treated by the predominant society. That's why Goldman Sachs is giving them money and investing in their future, because there is no future in us, because we have a subculture of violence. All of us. Not all of us, but a lot of us. These are the arguments that are being made. They borrowed this framework and interpolated into their theory. And here we are in the space trying to combat against feminism, but we have the same talking points that they do about ourselves. That's important for you to know. But anyway, I'm gonna keep pushing. The proliferation of violence within this context is believed to result from a tendency among subcultural offenders to embrace values and norms that are more permissive of the use of violence under certain conditions. Implicit in this proposition is the concept of disputatiousness. I don't know if you know what disputatiousness is, but it suggests that violence is a central means for subcultural affiliates to maintain and protect their status. So somebody feels upset about something. Fuck you, nigga. I'm gonna beat your motherfucking ass. You bitch ass nigga. Fuck you, nigga. That's disputatiousness. It means that you can't reconcile a difference in a civilized manner. And I hate to say this, it almost seems as if we're proving them right. I hate to say that. But anyway, man. So disputatiousness is when you're confronted with a problem with another individual, instead of being humble and trying to find an alternate means by which to work through the conflict, you go straight to violence or the threat of violence. Or you go to insults. And that's because we have a poor value system. That's the assertion. Okay? So according to Wolfgang and Ferracuti, violent reactions to perceived threats to reputation or honor are culturally prescribed, given that a failure to react defensively may result in life-threatening consequences. So if somebody disrespects you or disrespects your reputation, instead of being humble and saying, okay, well, this individual might have an issue and he might be mad momentarily, let me let it chill for a minute. No, the first thing you do is you go for your gun, or you threaten to use a gun, or you threaten violence to that person. So these are the claims being made about us. Okay? And that there's a value system that we have that promotes this. So in this sense, violent values act as a mechanism of social control, given that they require members of a subculture to engage in violence for their own protection and survival. As a result, equipped with the values to justify their violent actions, Subcultural offenders engage in violence frequently and guiltlessly with little provocation. Okay, so that's the theory. Though they draw from the insights of cultural deviance theorists before them, empirically, Wolfgang and Ferracuti based their theorizations entirely upon inferences from available statistics on homicide at that time, which illustrated a concentration of violent crime in primarily poor, racialized neighborhoods in Philadelphia. So they didn't look all over America. They didn't look in the rural South where blacks were living. They didn't look in New York and Philly and Chicago and St. Louis and Detroit. They just looked at Philadelphia. But this is common for sociologists to look at a small sample group and then to generalize from that particular. This is commonly done. But anyway, through these statistics, the authors deduced that subcultural violence is a uniquely marginalized male phenomenon. It's mainly a black male problem. Let's just cut to chase. They're trying to be nice here. It's a black male problem, as opposed to the random and anomalous violence of the mainstream world. This particular strain of violence, they argue, is a collective phenomenon, a normal experience for poor, non-white men. The proposed methodology in the subculture of violence focuses on identifying pro-violent values. It is believed that the observation of values will, in turn, provide insight into the group norms. That's a lot to unpack there. It is believed that the observation of values will, in turn, provide insight into the norms, group norms, since the latter, the group norms, sustains the values through rewarding conformity and penalizing nonconformity. So if you're violent, you get praised. If you're nonviolent, you get called a bitch ass nigga. Right? Pookie and Ray Ray. Thus, individual action, attitude, and perception are considered to be the key to understanding the collective phenomena of a culture. So the individual actions, the attitude, and perception are considered to be the key understanding of the collective phenomena of culture. With this in mind, Wolfgang and Ferracuti proposed the following. We suggest that by identifying the groups with the highest rates of homicide, we should find in the most intense degree subcultures of violence, and having focused on these groups, we should subsequently examine the value system of their subculture. The importance of human life in the scale of values. Fuck you, nigga, you ain't shit. Bitch ass nigga. Die, nigga. The kinds of expected reaction to certain types of stimulus. You step on my shoes, I'm gonna kill you. Or you say something on YouTube I don't like, I'm gonna fucking beat your ass, nigga. Perceptual difference in the evaluation of stimuli and the general personality structure. I butchered that. So let me start over. And having focused on these groups, we should subsequently examine the value system of their subculture, the importance of human life in the scale of values, the kinds of expected reaction to certain types of stimulus, perceptual difference in the evaluation of stimuli, and the general personality structure of the subcultural actors. Thus following the identification of a potential subculture of violence based on statistics indicating concentrations of violence amongst marginalized men. Whether pro-violent values are in existence should be assessed through determinations of whether there is collective approval, encouragement, and reward for engaging in violence. Finally, in order to examine whether a variance exists between suspected subcultural offenders and middle-class individuals, Wolfgang and Ferracuti proposed measuring social values using a ratio scale, as in psychophysics or psychometrics, focused on items concerned with behavioral displays of violence. Although they do not actually apply their methods, this is the funny thing about this. They didn't apply their methods, nor did they test their thesis. They never tested it. They just came up with a theory, a thesis. They never tested it. They expressed certainty regarding the potential of their method to identify subcultural offenders, predict who might become a subcultural offender, and ascertain the location of such offenders. This to me is the precursor to the prison industrial complex, if you ask me, but it is what it is. Some of you endorse it. You think they need to be incapacitated. They think we all need to be incapacitated, but that's a whole nother matter altogether. So, empirical examinations, because if you're gonna make a theory in sociology, you need to test it. You gotta test it with empirical data. So, over the past 3 decades, the subculture of violence thesis has undergone considerable scrutiny. Given that Wolfgang and Ferracuti's claims at the time they were writing were, for the most part, unsubstantiated. Let me say that again. Over the past 3 decades, the subculture of violence thesis is undergoing scrutiny, given that the claims at the time they were writing were, for the most part, unsubstantiated. They just wrote some shit using homicide data in Philadelphia. They didn't even go check to see what the values of these men were at all. That's not sound academics, man. And it definitely is not sound reason. It sounds like common sense, but it's not common sense. In academic terms, this is just fuckery. It's what it is. It's quackery. But I digress. Those who have undertaken evaluations of this framework have pointed out the tautological or circular reasoning that underlies the assumed link between violent values and violent actions. I had a conversation for 4 hours with one of my good buddies, man. We kind of disagree on this issue, but I told him, dude, that's tautological. I said it at the time. Go back and look at the video on Pookie and Ray Ray and violence and black men. I like this guy a lot. You're a dude, so I'm not trying to, reference you in order to be deprecating in any way whatsoever. All I'm just trying to do is to highlight the idea that it's circular to say that a violent action springs from a violent value. You're assuming, you're begging the question. Why was he violent? Because he valued violence. It could have been a whole host of reasons why a person was violent. The person could have been threatened. The person could have been subjected to violence himself or herself. There's a whole host of reasons for which people are violent. Maybe the person had a bad day. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they've been pushed around and bullied and they're finally fighting back. How do you determine why somebody was violent? You can't just assume, oh, well, they have a violent value system. Now, it could be the case that they do. I'm not saying. It could be. Because I know a whole bunch of guys that do value violence, especially if you're committing acts of violence against them. But the funny thing about this is a micro perspective of what violence is and what it entails. Now, I've heard, like the last time I was hearing somebody go through, this argument, it was on the Prophets of Thought series. And then one of the brothers there was like, okay, well, when black people do violence on one-on-one against each other on a micro level, that's some nigga shit. But when white boys commit acts of violence, it's beneficial to the society at large. And so therefore, that violence is justifiable. And that's a utilitarian argument. I'm not going to go there right now because I really haven't explained what utilitarianism is to you guys. But it is a moral theory which asserts that the maximization of pleasure and the minimization of pain for the greatest number of persons is the right principle to follow when you act or when you develop policy. But the question is, damn, America has like how many people? 300 million? But how many millions of people have Americans fucked over in the course of the 60, 70 years that they've been involved in being the police of the world? How many? And I'm not saying that there's no reason for it for them, but the idea that everybody benefits from war in a culture, that could be true of Vikings and the people who actually go to war, but I just don't see how the average American benefits from war.
And I want somebody to draw that link out to me because I haven't noticed it. I haven't noticed the trickle down effect when we go conquer another area, or when we annex another area, or we extract their resources, the resources trickle down to every American. I thought private defense contractors got all the goodies from that. Donald Rumsfeld and them boys. I thought they were the ones who were able to take advantage of the goodies associated with going out and committing military actions or police actions in the world. I didn't know that, the average black man got a stimulus check every time, some white guys decided to go out and bully some people around the globe, either for their security or for reasons of extracting resources for their own benefit. I didn't know that. I know we go to fight for them, and I know that soldiers get paid and they get remunerated for doing the work that they're told to do unquestioningly. But damn, I didn't know every American benefited from war. You even see how black folks weren't able to benefit from the GI Bill. Which is a policy directly, like if anybody's supposed to receive benefits, it's supposed to be the military combatants. Now, of course, with the integration of the Army and the Navy and the Coast Guard and the Marines, you're starting to see increased capacity of black men to share in these kind of, benefits now. To some degree. But veterans, a lot of veterans still get treated like garbage. There's a lot of homeless veterans out here. But I digress. I'm getting away from the main point. Okay? So to me, it's tautological. It's circular. I agree with that. That's just my viewpoint. Why was he violent? Well, he has a violent value system. It could be a whole bunch of causes for a person to become violent. All right. So anyway, in addition, Wolfgang and Ferracuti's assertions have been widely criticized for perpetuating stereotypes of young African American males, for failing to consider the emergence of subcultures of violence. Like, where do they come from? How do they start? Again, I encourage you, go see Bastards of the Party. Because these black gangs, especially on the West Coast, because one could argue, bruh, if you want to look at the subculture of violence in the black community, if there actually is one to begin with, it comes to us via hip hop. Because prior to that, it wasn't about hip hop being violent. It was, when I grew up, it was the Soul Sonic Force, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, the Johnson Crew. It was, Big Daddy Kane, Biz Markie. They weren't talking about going out shooting and killing and murdering. They weren't talking about busting your wig back. The hardest MC was LL Cool J. He was the hardest. But then it went to the West Coast. You got Too Short, Easy and them boys, NWA. But that culture already existed, but it wasn't brought to the mainstream until West Coast rap. That's when it became popularized. So that's my viewpoint on this. Not to say that there wasn't a violent subculture that existed in the black community, like people weren't running numbers, there weren't any gangsters, anything like that in the past. But you didn't see this as like emblematic of black culture until you start to see this hip hop stuff. But white people always did define black people, especially black men, in terms of inferiority, either culturally, biologically, which I call ontologically, right? Or intellectually. Like there's something inferior psychologically about black men, something culturally inferior about black men, or ontologically, they just are just deficient. So anyway, then the next thing is, and for the theoretical the negligence of social structural factors in their discussions of root causes of violence. So this is all that we're trying to do. We're not trying to say, oh, well, we shouldn't explore the issue. We're promoting the culture or anything like that. All we want to do is examine other etiologies, other causes of this kind of behavior. It's not that, black people who have advanced degrees are like, yeah, we love black people when they kill each other. which is absurd. All I've been doing, especially even in this space, let's stop the violence. Let's stop the disputatiousness. Let's come together. Fuck that shit, nigga. Fuck you. Really? It's crazy to me. But anyway, man, I'm going to keep going. Okay. So many of the studies that have evaluated the subculture of violence thesis do not test it in its entirety. Rather, most examine elements of this perspective, focusing on specific positions such as the contention that there is a link between violent behavior and violent values. So far, empirical evaluations of Wolfgang and Ferracuti's propositions have not yielded conclusive support for the subculture of violence thesis. This section will review some of the most widely cited tests of this framework, as well as more recent applications of this theory, which attempt to go beyond the purviews of Wolfgang and Ferracuti's original propositions regarding the specificity of subcultural violence to lower-class racialized men. This discussion will be followed by a review of some of the more in-depth evaluations of whether the subculture of violence thesis is an appropriate explanation for the high rates of violence amongst poverty-stricken Black neighborhoods in the U.S. Finally, recent studies evaluating the existence of a subculture of violence in the southern U.S. will be reviewed in detail. Because it's been this thesis by Wolfgang and Ferracuti, which was never tested, has been applied to athletes. It's been applied to the American South. It's been applied to middle schoolers, high schoolers in America and in Iceland. It's been applied to people who play hockey, football. This subculture of violence thesis has been used profusely. Okay? So, anyway, there's a group of scholars named Ball Rokeach. And this is where I'm going to stop off, because I'm just going to end it and see what your comments are, and then I'll try to answer questions or respond to your comments. Okay, so Ball Rokeach in 1973 conducted one of the earliest examinations of the subculture of violence thesis. So maybe about 5 or 6 years after this thesis was presented in the academy, Ball and Rokeach said, okay, well, let's test it. Okay? They conducted one of the earliest examinations of the subculture of violence thesis, focusing specifically on whether individuals who engage in violence hold favorable attitudes towards violence and are committed to subcultural pro-violent values. She notes the distinctions between the concept of values and attitudes. So she makes this distinction. So you got values and then you have attitudes. The former is defined as a belief either about a desired end state of existence or a belief about a preferred mode of conduct, such as being honest, courageous, or loving. Those are values, okay? An attitude is defined as an organization of beliefs about a specific object, okay? About a specific object, an attitude about a person, attitude about a song, attitude about a specific brand of clothing or a particular French fries, some shit. Coca-Cola over Pepsi. What's your attitude about it? Okay? So a belief is something different than an attitude. But anyway, Ball Rokeach tests the hypothesized relationships between violent values, attitudes, and violent behavior through 2 independent studies. So the first time they went out and they had a probability sample of about 1,500 adult Americans, and the second population examined disparities in values amongst 363 male offenders who were incarcerated for various violent and nonviolent crimes. So they do a psychometric test. And let me just say this. Hard science is different from social science. And even though social science to me is important, I don't give it as much weight as hard science, because the hard sciences are dealing with inanimate objects. You know what they're going to do. They, for the most part, have always demonstrated a kind of uniformity in behavior. But that's anthropomorphization of inanimate objects. But they always do what they do at the atomic level. Now, if you start talking about the subatomic level, now we're talking about a whole different can of worms. I'm not trying to go there, but For the most part, chemicals do what chemicals do. Cells do what they do, for the most part, okay? But anyway, so an additional component of the first study entailed determinations of the degree to which participants in the national sample engaged in violent actions and behaviors. Right? In the latter study, the key objective was to determine whether violent and nonviolent offenders do in fact hold differing values towards violence. The extent to which respondents engaged in violence in the first study was assessed through self-report questions about their participation and experiences in interpersonal violence as both assailants and victims. In the second, engagement in violence was assessed through distinguishing between those offenders who were convicted of violent offenses and those who were not. Ball-Rokeach determined whether participants in the national sample held pro-violent attitudes through their responses to 3 hypothetical scenarios. So they gave them 3 things to think about. A teenage boy punching or beating another teenage boy. Do you approve of the violence or not? A public school teacher hitting a student. Do you approve of the violence or not? A judge sentencing a person to death. Do you agree with the violence or not? All right? Whether those who engaged in violence in both the national and prison samples were motivated by pro-violent values was assessed through a value survey compiled by them in an earlier study. For this portion of the experiment, the respondents were asked to rank in order of priority a list of concepts that are indicative of various human values, as well as a variety of human characteristics they found important or appealing. The survey did not include values specific to the use of violence for the purposes of protecting or maintaining reputation amongst peers. Now, see, this is foreshadowing, because what they're going to argue in this article is that peer pressure is one of the primary drivers of violence amongst young men, and black men, Latino men, white men. It doesn't matter. If you got a peer group that has norms associated with violence and they're influential in your life, it can cause you to do things that you normally wouldn't do. So it's going to be about peer pressure for these people. Okay? But I don't want to go there just yet. And then they're going to come up with solutions to how to mitigate the effects of peer pressure. That's what they're going to end up doing. Okay? But so that's the foreshadowing. With regard to the national sample, the researchers found no correlation between participation in violence and attitudes towards violence, leading them to reject the hypothesis that pro-violent attitudes lead to violent behavior. Respondents who had engaged in violence at one point in their lives were no more likely to approve of the use of violence within the given hypothetical scenarios. With regard to her assessment of the causal relationship between values and participation in violence, Ball-Rokeach found that amongst participants in the national sample, those who report moderate or high participation in violence place significantly more importance on an exciting life, mature love, and being imaginative, and less importance on social recognition, a comfortable life, and a world at peace. So Ball-Rokeach interprets these findings as lending little support to the proposition that violent values are conducive to violent behavior. She argues that if individuals who engage in violence do indeed hold the machismo values that Wolfgang and Ferracuti claim generate violence, it is more likely that these respondents would express a commitment to experiences associated with the idealized masculine persona, such as an exciting life, pleasure, social recognition, being courageous and independent. A lack of commitment to values characterized as non-machismo, such as being forgiving, would lend further support to the subculture of violence thesis. Though individuals who engaged in violence expressed some commitment to an exciting life, Ball-Rokeach advises that the differences in commitment to this value amongst this group and those that did not engage in violence was minimal. Similar findings were apparent in relation to the value comparison experiment amongst violent and nonviolent offenders in the prison sample. In other words, from Ball-Rokeach's point of view, and this was a study that was done 5 or 6 years after Wolfgang and Ferracuti initially came up with their thesis, she tested it. She found that values don't necessarily correlate with violence in and of itself. That's the findings. That's social science. I'm gonna pull out because I'm not gonna do this all night. Okay? And I don't want to do this all night. All right. But I mean, ultimately, the argument being made here is that there are a whole bunch of different causes of crime and violent crime at that. What is it that's causing these things? One could argue that it's okay, so people have a bad culture, that's what causes violence. Well, you had some researchers that went out and tested it and said, well, if it's the case, well, then let's go look and examine these people's values and do psychometric tests. That's the only way you can determine a person's value, by asking them. You have to talk to them. You have to observe them and see what they do in an iterated series of occasions. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to understand what their value system is. You just can't. How do you know what values a person holds other than by listening to what they say their values are? And even in that instance, it doesn't necessarily translate into them actually living by or abiding by those values. I can say I value unity and harmony in the manosphere and then go out. Or I could say I don't like violent or subculture violence actions and then go out and do it. I could say I want to go on a diet. I value being slender and healthy. I value that. And then do nothing at all in order to bring about the state of affairs. So this is the issue. Now, why is it important? At the end of the day, it's important because the subculture of violence theory is being used against black men, not just by sociologists and criminologists. It's also being used by black feminists to demonstrate why they need to be protected from us, why they need to be separated apart from us. It's important for you to understand this. And for the life of God, when we repeat these talking points from these sociologists and these criminologists without doing the work to investigate the origins of the theories, whether or not we can actually test them with empirical data and sound and rigorous research methods, we sound fucking dumb. We sound crazy. And so at the end of the day, Keeping 100 said it's pseudoscience. Look, sociology in and of itself is not hard science. You can't, there's just no way you can get rigorous science of a uniform kind from sociology. It's impossible to do. As far as we can approximate or get close, but there's no certitude because there's no certainty in human behavior. Human behavior is, it's subject to change. I'm not going to say it's arbitrary, but there's no uniformity in it. And that's what, like Aaron Frazier is what all I'm trying to do is echo what Aaron Frazier is talking about. America was founded on violence. They got here, they took all of the resources, the land and everything from the Native Americans, just committed acts of genocide. We ain't talking about men disputing one another. I'm pretty sure there was that too, though. Pretty sure. Because the person who actually found, do you know that there was a guy who was supposed to be granted an award for seeing land? Yeah. He wasn't given that award, even though he did see the land. Columbus ended up taking it through fraud, taking it from him. His life could have been set. But instead of him being given the reward, he wasn't. I didn't time you out either, 100. That's the bot. So, if you got any statements, any questions, man, feel free to put it out there. Why, bro? What are you saying, dog? Because 100, man, I want to get you. I wish I could actually get you on here and have you state what it is you want to state. in real time, but I don't have the ability to. So anyway, Aaron Fraser says America was created by violence. It's maintained by violence. Its violent values was passed down to it by its violent colonial parents of Western Europe. That's my argument, bro. That's my argument. If Africans learn violence, if the slave, we learn violence from them. Not to say that black folks in Africa were like in some sort of utopia. That no. But we're not talking about the annexation of entire continents, the transportation of millions of people from one landmass to another in order to exploit them for their labor for centuries. So that's the origin of the subculture of violence theory, man. And I want you to see it from an academic perspective. Now, I mean, I got a whole bunch of so here's an abstract from a criminology journal that was published in 2006. And I'm sure you can see this because I know I didn't go off the display. Here's one article, and it says, here's the abstract. We use data from the General Social Survey, which is a popular instrument. It's a psychometric instrument, okay? And they use these all the time, okay? So they use data from the General Social Survey to test Wolfgang and Ferracuti's hypothesis that violent values are widespread among African Americans. Contrary to the expectations of the black subculture of violence thesis, our analysis indicate that white males are significantly more likely than blacks to express violent tendencies in defensive situations, and that there is no significant difference between white and black males in offensive situations, ceteris paribus, which means all things being equal. Thus, we have rejected, within the limitations of our data, the hypothesis that a unique subculture of violence exists among the general populations of African Americans in the United States. Next one. So this is the Ball-Rokeach study that was mentioned earlier. Okay, it's kind of in let me see if I can blow it up a little. So this is what she says in her own abstract. This research examines the hypothesis that violent behavior results from a commitment to a subcultural value and attitude pattern. Special attention is given to Wolfgang and Ferracuti's subculture of violence thesis. Two types of violent behavior are considered: interpersonal violence and violent crime. Findings are drawn from two independent studies. One on the values and attitudes associated with interpersonal violence in a national area probability sample of 1,429 adult Americans, and the other on value differences amongst 363 men incarcerated in a Michigan prison for various violent and nonviolent felonious offenses. The data do not support the subculture of violence explanation of violent behavior. Additional findings are presented which indicate in the national sample that neither social economic status nor social class values are associated with violence. Now, I don't know if I agree with that all the way through and through, but the next. Urban black violence, the effect of male joblessness and family disruption. This article was published, let me see, in 87. So I gave you one from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000. I didn't give you one from the 90s, but one from 2006. Okay, this is the one from the late 80s, which was one could argue like around the 90s was the peak of black homicide, black on black homicide. But anyway, this paper examines the relationships among unemployment, crime, and family disruption in the black underclass, and they put that in quotes. The main hypothesis tested is that the effect of black adult male joblessness on black crime is mediated largely through its effects on family disruption. The study examines race-specific rates of robbery and homicide by juveniles and adults in over 150 U.S. cities in 1980. The results show that the scarcity of employed black men increases the prevalence of families headed by females in black communities. In turn, Black family disruption substantially increases the rates of black murder and robbery, especially by juveniles. These effects are independent of income, region, race, and age composition, density, city size, and welfare benefits, and are similar to the effects of white family disruption on white violence. The paper concludes that there is nothing inherent in black culture that is conducive to crime. Rather, persistently high rates of black crime appear to stem from the structural linkages among unemployment, economic deprivation, and family disruption in urban black communities. That's another one. And lastly, okay, I already showed you that. So yeah, there it is. Now, I'm going to eventually read to you Tommy Curry and his idea about how the subculture of violence theory is being used in order to create this cleavage between black men and women, and to confirm the suspicions about black men that intersectionalists are putting out there, because they use this research, the subculture of violence theory, in order to make the kind of claims that they do about how they're being continuously subjected to violence by us. And it's odd that we continue to repeat these talking points as if they are true. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't violent black men. There are. But there's also violent black women. I mean, shit, just the other day, you had two black girls, two young black women who tried to carjack a Uber Eats driver and killed him in a carjacking. We talk about DV and how women are just as violent as men in the context of intimate partner relationships. Yeah, I'm gonna leave all the links to all of those articles, and I'll leave them in the description, the description of the video. Actually, let me just pull some of this stuff up now, so I can just actually give it to you right now instead of doing it any other way. Now, let me do that now. So I'm gonna put all these links in the description so you can have it. That's one link. All right. So that's the first thing that was what I was reading to you from. Okay. So let me go to the next one. And we do this not to give sanction to violence. We do this not to say that we support black people going at each other like fucking animals. That's absurd, man. We're trying to figure out what the causes of this kind of behavior actually are using the scientific method, and either being scrutinizing of the methodology being employed or endorsing it because we confirm it through our own reproduction of the data. That's what this is. But to argue that like somehow we're supporting this shit, like I've been the main proponent of trying to get black men in this space to be more respectful to each other. Not to be disputatious. Oh, you don't believe what I believe? Fuck you, nigga. Fuck you, bitch ass nigga. That's crazy to me, man. It's just absolutely fucking insane to me, man. I just don't get it, man. But anyway, here's the next one. Hold on. Let me go. I said I was gonna give you the next one. Because there's some articles that endorse it, there's some that don't. But you're gonna be hard pressed to find a sociologist nowadays who's going to actually say that this is meritorious. This research is meritorious. I'm just being real. You're going to be hard pressed to find a social scientist nowadays who's going to endorse the subculture of violence theory. You just are, man. But there are a few. There are a few. So I'll leave all of them in the description. I'll leave all of them in the description to the vid. But look, all I'm trying to do is explain this. Tomorrow, I'll show the implications that it has for black men beyond what white people say. Because when intersectionalists start taking up this tack, this is why they're able to put out there all these protect black women. Black women are the most disrespected. Black women are subjected to all kinds of violence. They're using this research in order to paint us in a certain kind of way. And we can't defend ourselves against it if we don't know it. So all I'm trying to do is give you access. This by no means is definitive and exhaustive, but you need to study it and you need to know something about it, because you basically are like echoing these talking points, but you don't know the source of the information. I'm here to give you the source of the information. And by the way, it's also odd to me. This is another odd thing to me. So a lot of guys don't like street culture, but you also don't like intellectual culture of an academic kind. Like, what do you hold in high esteem or regard? That is confusing to me. So men with terminal degrees don't deserve respect. They get treated the same as the street guys. Even though we all come from the same place, some of us have engaged in this behavior. I'm pretty sure some of you have been in fist fights. Some of you are just recently let people know that you're ready for a fist fight. So this shit just befuddles my brain, man. I don't understand it, man. I'm confused at you guys, man. Like, I don't know what to say, man. Like, I'm flabbergasted. What do you respect? Middle culture? Like, mediocrity? Like, what the fuck? What is it that you actually do respect? Business owners? They're not exactly the most virtuous people either. Shit, I mean, look at all the scandals. Like, look at the study about Harvard Business School and Yale Business School and their moral impropriety about cheating and all kind of other shit. Go look at their values and what they do. So, I mean, look, it is what it is, man. I'm back, man. I'm going to continue to give you information to the best of my ability. If you enjoy the information, man, I'm here to stay. I'm doing this for the people who actually like it. If you don't like it, man, you don't have to view it. You don't have to integrate the information into your life, man, and into your knowledge toolbox. I'm not here to start wars. I'm not here to justify the injustifiable. I'm just here to disseminate information about a specific area of inquiry. Take it or leave it, man. Do what you will with it. But it's funny because tomorrow I am going to read Curry and what he has to say about this kind of thinking from these theorists and how they have an impact on our lives currently because of how they're integrated into contemporary feminist thinking and theory. So if you want me to stay, I'm going to stay, man. I know at least there's 80 people who want me to stay. 82 now. At least 82 people want me to stay. But I'm going to keep doing the work, man, because I think the work is important. It is what it is, man. So I'm not going to get involved in monkey business, man. I'm not going to be issuing insults back and forth. I'm not going to engage with disputatiousness with anybody in here, man. I'm not about to do that. And the only reason I'm not about to do that because I know where it goes. I know where back and forth disrespect amongst men goes. And I know real beef versus contrived beef. I know the difference. I know killers for real. Like, I know guys who will knock your fucking brain box off and go laugh. They won't get agitated. They won't get all upset. They won't huff and puff and talk about, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow you. They ain't not going to do any of that. They're going to be like, oh, we got a job to do? Okay. They're just going to go do it. So anyway, man, I appreciate y'all, man. Thanks for supporting me. I know it's my first day back. So I'll be here, man. I ain't going nowhere, bro. I'll holler at y'all, man. Till tomorrow. Peace. Out this thing.
Green Gorilla Beat.